We are now shifting over to the 6th Congressional District. Yesterday, we had two candidates for the 6th Congressional District join us. We'll have again two candidates today. Mariah, I'm going to put you on spotlight. In a moment, to begin, take a few minutes to tell us who you are, why you're running, and all of that I'm sure you've been used to saying many a time in the campaign so far.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Mariah Lancaster. I grew up here in Northeast Mass. I am a veterinarian by training. I worked in emergency medicine for a number of years, doing policy on the side, state house advocacy, federal advocacy, while working as an emergency veterinarian and essential worker throughout the pandemic. And then in 2021, I shifted into federal service. I got a AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences fellowship at the State Department, and that took me to DC. I spent 2 years in counter-corruption work, combating environmental crime and corruption writ large around the world, as both a grant officer and also as a diplomat, backbenching treaty negotiations, et cetera. And then from there, I got another fellowship that took me into Congress, and I worked for Congresswoman Betty McCollum, Minnesota 4th, representing St. Paul, Minnesota. Worked there for a year, and then I got a full-time staff position as a legislative assistant in the office of Congresswoman Julia Brownley. I worked there for a little bit, covering everything from energy and environment to sustainable agriculture and alternative protein development, as well as a little bit of national security, given my background from the State Department as well. And then I started to make the shift home, worked in advocacy for a little bit, and moved back to Massachusetts last year and jumped into the congressional race. I've been joking, honestly, it's maybe not much of a joke, but when people ask why run now, I felt like my options were burn it all down, flee the country, or run for office. So I chose the one that seemed most productive. And certainly it also has felt for a long time, both from working on the Hill, but also from being from this area, that the Massachusetts 6th District has not been as well represented as I would like for it to be. And so given the opportunity to bring all my expertise and my experience, having worked in 2 out of 3 of the federal branches of government, as well as being just a normal working person with experience, coming home from third shift at 10 in the morning and going to sleep and getting ready to do it all over again. I feel like those are perspectives that are really important in Congress. And so it felt like a bit of the stars aligning to take this chance.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So obviously here we're with Progressive Massachusetts. Do you consider yourself progressive? And if so, how would you define the word progressive?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a staunch progressive. I would even say that I'm a lifelong progressive. Um, I I really, when I think about what makes a progressive, I think it's being unafraid to take on the big, hard fights when it may seem like power is stacked on the other side, or that especially party leadership might be pushing you a different direction. Understanding that the priorities that are going to benefit the people and the communities come first, and that it is worth standing up to power to protect those that are most vulnerable.
Awesome. Thank you. Let me bring myself back onto Spotlight for the next question. Okay, do you support the goal of abolishing ICE? And if so, what does that mean to you in practice?
Yes. So I was very out in front in this congressional district field saying, yes, we need to abolish ICE. Especially having worked at the State Department, I interacted with DHS employees and saw the kind of work that they do and the ways in which they are inherently duplicative in a lot of that work. I also am of the generation that grew up in the post 9/11 era, seeing the world both before and now after the creation of DHS in its modern iteration. So I would go a step further beyond just saying we need to abolish ICE. This is not just about one rogue agency within an otherwise functional department. We are looking at a inherently I believe, corrupt department within the federal agencies that needs to be completely deconstructed. And our immigration system has gotten so far away from the fundamental tenets of what America is intended to be as a melting pot and as a welcoming nation. And so what I would do is take DHS apart essentially brick by brick. And this is something that you can do within Congress through restructuring the agencies. And I would take TSA and I would put them in the Department of Transportation. I would completely deconstruct ICE, and I would, you know, work with my colleagues in the Progressive Caucus to cultivate a new agency that focuses just on immigration through a civil process. So that is my approach in terms of what that looks like in practice.
Awesome, thank you. So over the past few decades, we've seen increasing concentration of corporate power, whether with like kind of monopolies and mergers, letting fewer companies controlling more and more of specific sectors. We've also seen increasing economic inequality kind of in the country, both in terms of income and wealth. What would be, if elected, your top priorities to rein in corporate power and to reduce income and wealth inequality, both in the district and across the country?
Yes. We need robust antitrust across the board. So that is just the fundamental point of attack is no no company, no conglomerate should be able to own the majority of a market share. And that goes across all industries. For me, where I would want to focus my energies first is the healthcare industry, from both the lateral consolidation that we've been seeing in all these industries, but also the vertical integration. I'm allowing myself to speak a little bit more wonky than I do on the campaign trail. So feel free to say, like, what do you mean by that? If I'm saying something that anybody doesn't understand. But fundamentally, what we are seeing is essentially a shell game, a corporate shell game where companies are consolidating power, consolidating market share, and pretending that they're not, because they are just they're piecemeal, right? They're all part of one caterpillar. And so by requiring all of those segments to break up and be independent entities, that is how you restore consumer choice, and you actually create an economy where small businesses can compete and flourish. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about preventing companies from growing too big. It is also about making sure that we have an economy where somebody who wants to start a small business in that sector has economic opportunity to do so without being immediately squashed out of the market or undercut by some companies such as Amazon that is so large that they can fundamentally just take the loss until the other company goes under. So these are all the practices, and there's a million different ways in which these corporations are both undercutting competition and consolidating their power. But the healthcare industry is where I would want to start, not just in the human healthcare industry, but especially with my veterinary expertise, because this is an enormous problem that we've been seeing in the veterinary industry, both from the lens of reduced consumer choice and increasing costs. I mean, I keep saying it's going to very shortly, it's going to be more expensive to own a dog than it is to have a kid. Like, that is where we're headed. And so we need to absolutely stop that in its tracks, break up these mega corporations, and make sure that we are taking those same principles and applying them across the board.
Great, thank you. For our next question, in terms of things that have also been trend lines getting worse across decades, what would be your top priorities for addressing the climate crisis and transitioning the US away from fossil fuels?
Yeah. Energy and environment are kind of intrinsically linked when we talk about federal policy, when especially as a staffer having worked on that portfolio. It is a enormous issue. Just a little bit of personal context. I am the child of somebody who in the 80s got a law degree in environmental law, and then got a PhD in oceanographic chemistry and early climate science, and then got sued by the oil lobby. So this has been my whole life. I've been steeped in the understanding that the fossil fuel lobby has enormous political power. You can probably see my Green New Deal poster back here. This is a huge priority for me, and it is issue number one alongside healthcare that we need to be working on. The Biden administration came a long way in establishing investments that integrated portions of the Green New Deal, but also were really trying to both onshore infrastructure for clean energy projects, as well as push into the future of clean energy infrastructure. This administration is destroying a lot of that progress. So step one is evaluating the full scope of all the projects that were supposed to go forward that have been canceled or halted or slowed, and restoring those federal dollars. We have to act against this administration to make sure they are not impounding money that was supposed to go out, that was promised to these projects across the country that are ongoing potential for our clean energy industry. So there's that. We have the tools to be on the right track. We just have to chase them and we have to enforce them. So that is a huge piece of the fossil fuel dependence transition, because otherwise what we're seeing is just endless overseas conflict over oil. Can't have that. And so when we get from there into climate mitigation, there's a million different things that I want to work on all at the same time. We know that, and this is again a little bit of my nerdiness as a veterinarian, the cattle industry is a huge piece of climate impact. So part of what I worked on in the house was alternative protein streams and cultivated protein to help make it so that we as a growing population have access to protein without growing the cattle industry. That needs to be true domestically in the US, as well as the way that we source our protein internationally. That also means investing more in family farms, making sure that we are dealing with issues around food waste and methane blow off from our landfills, as well as working on proactive climate change mitigation measures, because there's a lot that we would have loved to have avoided that we are now on the precipice of. And so there are things that we can do in terms of investing in ways to create deeper carbon sinks, in terms of making sure that we are transitioning our economy away from fossil fuels and towards more sustainable practices. And at the same time, we also need to be investing federal funds in climate change mitigation measures, make sure that homes on coastlines aren't going to be flooding, and we're not going to be dealing with any more than we absolutely must, because there's some aspects of this that are inevitable. But the reality of a climate change refugee crisis, which we are already starting to see the impacts of.
Thank you. Let me bring up Max to ask the next question.
Hi. In light of discriminatory anti-trans legislation on both the state and federal level, would you fight for trans people in Congress, especially trans youth who are incredibly vulnerable right now? And if so, how would you do it?
Yes. One, as a non-binary person and a member of the queer community, this is an incredibly important issue for me. Jonathan knows this. I last year was inquiring about whether or not there was appetite for somebody else to run for the seat based on some of the rhetoric that was coming out of the prior member. And I really feel like it is incredibly important for the coalition of not just the progressive left, but the entire Democratic Party to not ever cede the ground on a single civil right of a vulnerable population for the sake of political ease. So just step one, civil rights are civil rights, full stop. In terms of what we do about that, I mean, what I'm seeing every day right now is this administration taking more and more horrific steps to imperil the queer community, whether that's by trying to take away our rights to passports, undermining our ability to have proper even driver's licenses in various parts of the country. It is, hands are a little bit shaky on this answer because it's so scary, and it is truly one of the larger markers of our descent into fascism is the anti-trans legislation that we are seeing. So what we know is that the queer community has experienced this type of discrimination for a very long time, and we have been making progress through small bites at the apple over the years that has taken us to a place where gay marriage is legal nationally. We have some protections in place. What I would love to see personally is not just something like the Equal Rights Amendment that protects women get passed, but to see an equal rights amendment that includes trans protections and all gender spectrum expressions protected, because it is, no one should have to hide who they are, and no one should live in fear of being killed, injured, or any level of discriminated against for their inherent identity.
Thank you. I'm going to bring up Ziba for the next.
Hi there, I'm Ziba. You have a very interesting background.
A little bit
Um,
quirky.
I'm going to ask you about foreign policy.
Yes.
Many Democrats have opposed the U.S. military escalation with Iran, mostly on the grounds of lacking congressional authorization. And then they've supported measures like resolutions labeling Iran as the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, including both of your former employers, Congresswomen Julie Brownley and Betty McCollum, positions which can be used to justify action.
Yeah.
We'd like to know if you support continuing the war against Iran. Would you vote to stop funding the war? And would you support lifting or reducing sanctions as part of a negotiated end to the war?
Yes. I fully would support ending this war. There is, and we, I think a lot of the time we call it like a conflict abroad. This is a war that the president led us into without. I think it's an interesting thing when sitting Congress people claim that there is not congressional approval, because I agree with that on its face, that the president did not come and get congressional approval. That is a fact. But also, we have been operating for 25 years under an authorization of military force that Congress has not stopped. And so to say that there is not a ounce of congressional compliance in this is, I think, a little bit abdicating one's responsibility. So what I firmly believe is we need to overturn the AUMF from the post 9/11 years and require that in order for a dime to go out at all into foreign wars, into foreign conflict in any way, that the president has to come to Congress. Because right now, we have essentially spent 25 years operating with that as a courtesy and not a legal requirement. So as of right now, yeah, not a single dime from me would go to funding this conflict. What I see when I look at the overall scope is a president who is so deep into the corruption that he has brought into the White House that we are putting our sons and daughters in harm's way for not just oil, but for his own political purposes. And that is despicable, and it must be stopped today. So yeah, I'm sure that there's another piece of that question that I missed a little bit, but let me know if there's any kind of follow-ups on that you would want from me.
I'm curious about your perspective on sanctions
Yeah. Yes, I am absolutely happy to. I think sanctions are an important tool at certain times, but I think they are being abused in this circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do know is that Iran was very willing to work with us diplomatically to never develop nuclear capacity. We know that. And instead, this president, I hate to call him that, charged ahead and decided to escalate to a conflict despite the ability to work through diplomatic means. Especially as a former diplomat, I understand the importance of soft power and diplomatic negotiation. And that has been not just essentially defunded by this administration, but it has been completely disregarded for, again, their own political purposes and greed. So I would want to invest much more deeply back into the diplomatic corps and make sure that we are negotiating properly. And that includes easing sanctions on a country that is willing to negotiate with us.
Thank you. My second question is about do you believe that Israel's actions in the West Bank and Gaza constitute a genocide? And if so, would you vote to end military aid to Israel, both offensive and defensive weapons?
I think that's a really incredible question. What I will say is I believe firmly it's a genocide. It meets the requirements. I believe that very strongly. I do think that saying all offensive weapons and all continue to supply defensive is trying to walk a very fine line that I'm not sure really exists, because defensive weaponry does still take lives. It is still weaponry. And so I admittedly am not, my security clearance is not active enough for me to know exactly what the weapons shipments are that are being deployed. I'm very comfortable saying that I would not send another dime until humanitarian aid is prioritized and there's a true ceasefire in place. If the conflict is ongoing, if there are still people being bombed and killed in Palestine, I will not vote for a dime of aid to Israel.
Iran, not just Palestine.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Thank you.
Great.
The
Thank you.
Sorry.
N-
Thought we
no worries. One question I want to tag in just super quick before we
Yeah.
go to the final question is the Congressional District 6 race has the most candidates of any of the races happening right now in Massachusetts for the congressional races.
Yes.
For people evaluating all of the candidates in the field, what's your quick let's say 30 seconds for why do you stand out the most in that race?
Yeah. I bring two disparate aspects of experience to this
Okay.
race, both having the federal experience to understand how these systems work and be able to hit the ground running on day one, while also having the lived experience of someone who grapples with student debt, is a renter, has worked a job that's not in a suit, right? Has come home. I referenced this earlier, but has come home in the morning watching the sunrise as you're getting off a shift, taking your mask off and getting in the shower to wash off blood and worse, and rinsing and repeating. I have worked hard, grueling hours in jobs that do not pay you what you deserve, and I have lived on the margins, not just as an essential worker, but growing up in my family, there were instances of food scarcity, and I'm a member of the disability community. There is so much lived experience that I bring that is completely different from what anybody else in this race can begin to discuss. And so I want to the piece of my campaign that encapsulates this is saying, like, in order to be able to actually fight for working people, in order to represent working people, we have to send people who have worked. We have to send working people to Washington.
Okay, so our final question, and keep it and kind of quick. So we're here talking about our own endorsement process with Progressive Mass. And so my question to you is, how do you as an individual decide whom and whether to endorse candidates?
Ooh, it's an interesting thing because there's obviously endorsements that you can make, that you could endorse, let's say in a field of 8, right? You could endorse 2, right? But if you're endorsing 1, that makes things much more complicated. From my perspective, I think it's really important to have a rigorous vetting process, which Progressive Mass does. So when somebody asks me for endorsement, I make sure to not just have one conversation with them, but a few, to not just learn where they all are on their policy stances, but what is their lived experience? What are they bringing to this? And when push comes to shove, are they going to stay true to their values, or are they going to go with their comfort? Because especially in something like this, where you are sending a new member of the Massachusetts delegation to Congress, in a delegation that happens to also include a lot of leadership, right? It is very tempting for whomever gets this seat to go along to get along. And I think that it's very important that whoever Progressive Mass endorses, whoever I endorse in a race, is somebody who has their own values and is going to stay true to those and will not bend based on the political winds.
Great. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Can we get a round of Zoom applause for Mariah?